So this is going to be a quick tutorial on Neuro Bass sounds and sort of achieving various Neuro Bass sounds. Although I will say that there are many producers out there that have spent years on perfecting their techniques and sound. So you definitely will have to experiment around a lot to sort of discover your own sound and discover your own sort of techniques. But I'm just going to be sort of going over the basics to get you started and getting you messing around with the sounds. So anyways, this is the basic sound that we're going to be messing around with today. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to mess around with, and let's get started. So we're going to start with a Malström, just initialized patch. We have a sine wave here, and one of the key reasons that we choose Malström is because Malström is just really good for having motion. You can use any synthesizer you want, but Malström just really sort of caters towards adding motion to a sound, which is a key element of Neuro Bass sounds. So to start, oscillator A is currently a sine wave, which is not what we want. We want a sawtooth 4. But actually, before I go to sawtooth 4, I'm going to go to normal sawtooth, just to sort of explain what the sawtooth 4 is, why we're choosing it. So basic sawtooth sounds like this. Very sort of static sound. As I hold down the note, it's not really changing over time. It's pretty consistent sound. Whereas if we choose sawtooth 4, there's all sorts of motion going on, and this is created because there are 4 oscillators playing sawtooth waves that are just detuned slightly from each other, so they're going in and out of phase. So it adds this sort of interesting motion to the sound. And you can actually mess with this motion to change the speed of it. But the default motion is actually good for this example. So we have 1, and we're actually going to start up a second one, oscillator 2, also on sawtooth 4. Having them exactly the same is not really doing anything for us, so we're going to detune them slightly from each other to add even more phasing and motion going on. So I'm just going to bring this one up 3 and this one down 3. You can bring it up different amounts. It'll mainly just sort of affect the speed that you'll hear the phasing, and I think that 3 sounds pretty good. So that's even sort of more phasing and motion going on. Adds interesting sounds. And now we're going to want to put these oscillators through the filter A. And we're going to be wanting to use a bandpass filter. And this is a bandpass filter is fairly important to the sound. You'll hear us once we get into it. But basically, it's just focusing on a single band or a group of frequencies as you move the frequency knob, which adds a really interesting sort of motion sound. So to get there, we're going to send oscillator A to the shaper. The shaper is automatically going to dump into the filter, so oscillator A is good now. But oscillator B is not currently going to anything, so first we want to send it to filter B. We don't want to use filter B, so we're going to turn that off. But then we're going to send filter B to the shaper, which will then dump into the filter A. So now they're both oscillator A and B are going into filter A. And you can hear that low pass filter right now, which we don't want the low pass filter, we want the bandpass filter, so I'll switch to that. And then as I move this frequency knob, as I'm playing a note, we are starting to get our basic motion sound from that bandpass filter. I don't want to manually move the frequency knob, so my options are I can either like automate it and then write in the movement in the sort of traditional sequencer, or I can use a LFO to do this motion for me, which is actually what I did in the example and what I'll be doing right now. So there's our sound, and we want to turn up the filter amount in this LFO. So I think between like 45 and 50 sounds pretty good for this filter amount. I did 47 this time, but it's not always going to be the same. That's sounding pretty good. You also want to mess around with this frequency knob to get it to a place that sounds good to you. This is just sort of where the starting frequency is. I think around there sounds pretty good. Maybe a little bit higher. Yeah, that's probably good. So anyways, now we have that motion set up. There's only a few more things to do in this actual Malström. One of the a key thing is not having it on a polyphony of 8. So right now I can play multiple notes at the same time. It doesn't sound very good. So I'm going to bring the polyphony down to 1, so only one note can play at a time. So as soon as I play a new note, it will cut off the old note, which is good. And then I want to bring up the portamento so it bends between notes. That sounds pretty good. And we have our basic Malström patch. One other thing that I'll mess with is adding in some shaper distortion, and you can choose different types, but the noise type adds a little bit of sort of white noise feel to it, which can be nice to add a little bit of grit. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So really the only other things, this is our basic Neuro Bass sound, but it's a good idea to EQ and compress and limit it to sort of bring up the volume and accentuate different aspects of it more. The quickest way to do this is to use a combinator patch in the Reed Factory Sound Bank. There's a couple patches that I will often use. The All Effects patches go into Dynamics, go into Bass, and then the Nastier Bass or Nasty Bass work really well. You can mess around with different ones to sort of see what works well for you, but the Nastier Bass works really well for sort of gritty bass sounds. And if we open this up, all this is the EQ, compressor, and limiter. So first I'll go back to how it sounded before we had it, and with it. The main thing you'll notice is it's a lot louder, but it is also doing some EQing, which is adds some nice dynamics to it. But anyways, it's a lot of fun, and this is our basic Neuro Bass sound. Adding more to it is more sort of flavor. This is the basic idea behind it. Key aspects are the bandpass filter, and then having some sort of motion, which our main source of motion other than the bandpass filter moving is the sawtooth waves going in and out of phase with each other. You could add motion a number of different ways. I think the sawtooth waves going in and out of phase with each other sounds really good. But you can also add motion, even with like the shaper, you can add motion. Let me turn off this filter for a second. If I like automated this amount knob, I could add some interesting motion. Or messing with these shift knobs. Let's switch back to noise. But yeah, basically you're looking to add different types of motion. You can either add it with LFOs by connecting stuff up to the back, or you can automate it by option clicking or alt clicking on some computers to bring up the window, and you can mess around with automating it. And yeah, an example at the beginning of the video, I added a little bit of extra distortion and stuff, but that's all totally personal preference, and it's not any different than how I add distortion on other synths. The motion and the bandpass filter are really what makes the Neuro Bass really pop, and I think it makes it really interesting. So anyways, I'm going to conclude this video here. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and whatnot, and give me suggestions for future videos or whatever. Anyways, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.